Okay, so how's the presentation laid out today? Like all good attempting to be good teachers here, I've got your learning objectives out there really clear. You were sent a PDF copy of this presentation so that those are there for you as well. But the idea is to get really active in thinking about telehealth and to come away from today's presentation thinking about is there something in this for me that I could do more of, do differently, to improve outcomes for children and their whānau and family through the use of technology to enhance the work that I already do. We're doing this within the context of current best practice, general best practice principles in delivery of rehabilitation services to children with neurodisability and their families. So in that sense, we're thinking particularly about applying the principles of family-centred practice, a word we know really well, hear a lot of, but just a few reminders about what the details of that in terms of contemporary thinking about telehealth. And also, of course, in Aotearoa, thinking about how do we really engage well in a way that is most useful for Māori, most helpful with Māori, but also in a way that really celebrates Māori as our partners in New Zealand life and society. So the presentation today is basically broken up into those four areas that I've just described. Family-centred practice, what is it, and how can it be applied in a telehealth context using technology? Participation-focused practice is another really cornerstone of current best practice, that we focus on participation in the lived environment as the central driving outcome of all of our work for children and families, and that it is tailored for Māori, that it's tailored well for Māori, whatever interventions we use. And if it's delivered through the use of technology, what does that mean, and what are some of the ways that that can be done? So for a kickoff, so I'm going to move through each of these squares. We are going to move through each of these squares over the next hour and a half, not in clockwise order. So this, sorry, I should explain the dinosaur. A little tongue-in-cheek, we've sort of thought of using the metaphor of dinosaur as, you know, sometimes as therapists we can be not known for being, you know, the most embracing of technology in healthcare generally. So moving the dinosaurs into, I'm probably over representing myself here in saying that, into like full use of modern tools that are available. And the abbreviation for it, FACE T-REX, kind of captures each of these four elements that I've just that I have just gone through. So it's not a personal passion for dinosaurs that we have this framework. It is around the kind of framing of this idea as if it were an intervention, what would it look like? Enough feet, move on. Okay, family-centered practice. It's probably, has anyone got it in their mission statement? Hands up using the emoticons or your hand, the thing on the end of your arm, your real hand. What if family-centered practice is in your mission statement, or you would consider yourself even a family-centered therapist? Yep. Okay, let's flip that round. Anybody, hands up if you consider yourself not family-centered. Highly, I'm a profession-centered sort of a gal, highly profession-centered. That's what's in our mission statement. Anybody? Any takers? No takers? Okay, so we're all family-centered, right? So once we start to say that something is, of course we are all something or other, can start to lose its power as a concept. The same goes with just about anything in life. So we're wanting to really start to drill down on that. There are measures of how family-centered a therapist or a service are. So there are literally, you know, shades of grey and shades from white to black around how family-centered a person is, or a practice is, or a service, or even a set of policies. So here in this brief explanation about family-centered practice, I'm drawing from the current research literature on it. There is quite a substantial body of literature around the idea of family-centered care. So it came through from person-centered care as a concept, person-centeredness, which came through as a a new idea in psychology in the 1950s from Carl Rogers, and was really taken up by the self-help movement in the 1960s and 70s as a concept, as children with disabilities started to not be automatically put into institutions and families became a lot more involved and quite central to children's care. It was families themselves that really took up and pushed for this concept of family-centeredness. It has since somewhat been taken over by health professionals as the ones who are primarily defining and leading the ideas about what family-centeredness is, and that's a really it's a bone of contention in amongst some of the parent advocates around family-centeredness. It can be described in terms of these three layers or levels, and it was Gillian King, Peter Rosenbaum are really key players early in their careers around this sort of idea, these ideas around it. First of all, it's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking about the place of families in the provision of care and services around children with disabilities, or anybody in any healthcare encounter for that fact. It's really driven largely by the ideas of family-centered practices, driven by pediatrics and mental health are the two kind of areas of overall health that tend to give a lot of thought to what this idea means, by the way. So those concepts that, well, parents are the constant in child's life, not therapists or therapy services. So they should be at the absolute centerpiece and forefront of all decision making, and ideally at the centre place, but as engaged and involved as possible in all aspects of the provision of services. And we know that this is easy to say, but obviously looks really different with different families, and is easier with some families and is more difficult to support with other families. Parents know their child best. So coming from that, these are like core concept that I agree with these statements at a philosophical perspective if I am a highly family-centered therapist. Parents know their children best and know what's best for them. So of course they should be at the forefront of all decision making, because they really know this child in and out over 24/7, year after year. And the child is best helped by helping the family. So that idea of wrapping around a child, whatever's going on for any child, they develop best in a really strong, healthy, supportive family where the whole family's needs are being met. Hence moving to the principles level where the family is the unit of care rather than the child. So you might note in contrast that referrals come for children, not for families in most of our work. So I guess you could say that's an example where service design and systems might be out of sync with authentic family-centered practices, because the services, the measurement of progress, change, ready for discharge, these decisions are often still made. I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, but they're often made around the child's developmental age, stage, needs, rather than that of the whole family. So a really wholehearted embracing of family-centered practice would not be like that. It would be the whole family's needs. And it's strengths-focused. Who thinks they're a strengths-focused therapist? Does anybody think that they're a deficit-focused therapist? Didn't think so. So if we're all already strengths-focused, what does it really mean to be strengths-focused? It doesn't mean being Pollyanna or always saying, oh, that's just lovely, everything's just great, when sometimes it's actually not great. But it does mean always focusing on where the opportunities are, where the resources are, where the potential is, rather than how bad is it, how broken is it, how different is it, or atypical is it. But hey, what does thriving look like for your family? What would the next step be? That would be an example of flipping it from deficit focused to strengths focused. Now again, we're working in these pretty deficit oriented systems. So if you're someone that does find yourself talking about what's typical or atypical, what's a milestone achieved, what's a milestone not achieved, this kind of deficit-oriented ways of assessing and organising services, you're working in a system that really incentivizes you to do that. So when we're talking about working from a strongly family-centered perspective, it's minimizing that as absolute much as we can away from the family's experience of services, and or getting yourself into leadership positions where you can change the services and the service design. But as a coalface clinician, it's absolutely minimizing the exposure to that for the family, because it just orientates the family to the deficits, the difference, and what's wrong, and away from celebrating, thriving, striving as a family to have the life they want to have. And boiling down even further to specific practices. There is 2 key elements that are particularly helpful to think about in practices, in family-centered practice. They are diced and sliced in lots of different ways, depending on how complicated a theory you want to look up. But for the interests of today, Dunst and Trevette, I think it is, out of the States, they talk about relationship-focused partnerships and participation, high levels of family participation. These 2 elements. And a couple of people have done some really interesting studies actually on clinicians and found that they are often really good at one and not the other. And it actually comes out in the wash differently, but it's really interesting to think about these 2 key parts, because clinicians often identify more strongly with one or the other. What we're saying in family-centered practice is that it's both of these things. So it's relational. It's about the way that relationships are developed with families, with a high degree of partnership, choice, and unconditional positive regard in the relationship, the way that people are related to. So relating in such a way that the relationship develops with high levels of partnership. Both people have a strong sense of authority about something, about this child. It might be the OT with her expertise around feeding or sensory issues or handwriting, whatever, and the family's expertise about understanding the overall patterns for this child, what their preferences are, what that's likely to really get them excited and push hard on something that's really tricky or not. And participatory, the other element. When clinicians engage in such a way that they offer high levels of choice, control, invitations to the family to take part, to make a decision, to be involved, to do it their way, instead of the easy automated way that I enjoy using myself as a clinician. And to some extent, it can feel like there's this coming in around the family. There's this sense of security, and it might be around, hey, you know what? I'd like a bit of privacy around this. I'd like some space as a family to not be involved with services at the moment, to not be, for us not to be striving for reaching my maximum potential as a child or as a family. And that's a choice as well, to step back from services when that feels like the right thing to be doing. So those key elements about how we relate to people and how much we encourage participation. So of course people have the choice to not participate, but the more families are involved with children with disabilities, like children just about in any way, shape or form, the better the children do. So thinking about this across this continuum, I've got this, I'll explain my metaphor of the waka. Oh, that's not actually, if you look closely, it's actually more like a canoe, I think, in that picture. But the idea of whose boat we're on. Is it that getting the family on board? Anyone ever use that phrase in their career? Get the family on board. It's always great when you've got the family on board, and then then things run really smoothly, versus getting on the family's waka and going where it's important for the family to go, and learning how they do things in their family and how I might be able to support or assist with that. So if we think here from the principle in family-centered practice that we've just talked about already over on the left, those ideas of relationships, respect, partnering with family, and the idea of of participation, high levels of family autonomy, decision making within the context of a highly supportive relationship, and this active focusing on strengths. What does that look like in terms of the therapist action? Now, if we go from left from the principle all the way across to the far right of this diagram, what we're going for is better overall long-term health and well-being outcomes for children with disabilities and their families. So that's mums in particular with strong sense of competence as parents and caregivers of a child who might be, nasogastric feeding, high sense of competence in their capacity, their ability as the best parent for this child. They're absolutely the best because they are the child's parent. This is when children are going to do as well as they possibly can. So if we're thinking about that overall outcome, a strong sense of family identity, a strong sense of self-esteem and thriving as a family, and we go back over to the left, what is the therapist action that is most likely to support that kind of outcome? And it's actions such as actively investing in high trust relationships, engaging with families in ways that amplify their trust in you as the clinician as early from the get-go. Responding in ways with absolute respect and non-judgment, irrespective of what's going on with the family. If they're disclosing that, you know what, I lose the plot at him and belt him every now and then. So deal with that the way you need to deal with it in terms of child safety, but conveying absolute respect for the experience that that parent is having in this moment. That's the kind of quality that develops trust. And even without learning terribly, fancy, complicated psychology techniques, if we just have this in mind, the best thing that I can do with this family is give it everything I've got that they will trust me authentically. You will be doing the best that you possibly can be doing for this family. Never mind your Bailey's assessment and any of the other fancy stuff that you've got to do or report on. Number one objective is that they trust you. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. So the response, I suppose, that we're trying to elicit from the family is that they feel safe and respected. When they feel safe and respected, they'll turn up. They'll be there next time you have an assessment instead of non-attendance of sessions. And they will tell you honestly what's going on. I lose it so bad I go back to cutting myself, or whatever it is that's going on for that mum. If there's that kind of stuff happening, you want to know about it so that you can respond to it. You can bet if a mum is so distressed that she's doing something quite psychologically damaging to herself or whatever, she's not going to be doing that sensory diet program that you just gave her at the last session. She's not going to be doing those, walking exercises and animal walks to the bedroom. Not a show. And many a parent will tell you that they have, just to kind of get through the conversation as least awkwardly as possible. Second, allowing the child and the family to lead goal setting. We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but this is a real rubber hits the road moment in in our encounters with families in this interaction. How much do we corral the family to framing the goal in a way that we feel safe and comfortable as a health professional versus really being quite open to going with what the family raises. What the effect that has on the family is that they have increasingly supported sense of identity as a family. I know who I am. I know who we are as the family, what we're into, I already knew who we are as a family, and it's nice to have that on the page, and not have had to pretend that it was something else about, the next step in cutlery use or something that the therapist felt really comfortable with. And finally, creating opportunities for that active decision making during sessions and between sessions. This might mean keep our hands under our seat or in our pockets during the sessions rather than having our hands on the baby, thinking about how we communicate with families so mum knows exactly what to do to support a hemiplegic child during bath time or in a play situation where they're optimizing, their motor development through play. And again, the effect that we're hoping for from the family is, we got this. We know what we're doing as a family. We are capable and competent and very active problem solvers with or without that therapist. With this therapist and the next therapist. So that really proactive self-management. So all of the stuff that we've been talking about, totally the same in telehealth, just thinking about it differently, pausing to think how we might do that differently in telehealth. So I hope that's been a really helpful refresher in family-centered practice. I want you now to think about, do a little, think about ways in which you develop, allow, and create opportunities for high levels of trust. I think a very specific thing that you do in your practice, that you do you explicitly do, attempting at least to cultivate trust and to create opportunities for families to make a choice. I'm going to leave you thinking about that now as I hand over the speaking stick to the gorgeous Anna and Ariana from Dunedin. So I'm going to stop share there, and you can continue to think about what I just said around create, allow, and pop it into the chat box if you're still thinking that through as we go through. But Anna, over to you.